Hi there, welcome back to my channel. I am Candace. Right now I am just reading all the books and harnessing that energy and putting it into this chaotic, inconsistent YouTube channel. So I have posted my TBR for January, what I plan to read for the year from my physical TBR shelf back there. 23 books in 23, so I'll link those up there or somewhere. Let's get into what I read at the end of the year. And really this makes up about 90% of what I read throughout the whole year. For whatever reason, I didn't super feel like reading until November. Like that's how I usually do anyway. I usually get a lot of momentum in the winter months. Ironically, it is burning up today. Like I am actually sweating here. Let's talk about what I read first toward the end of the year, and that was Room by Emma Donoghue. And I still haven't seen the movie. I need to watch the movie. This story is told from the perspective of a young boy who has spent his entire life in this one room with his mother, who was kidnapped when she was in her early 20s, teenage years. I love books, adult books told from a children's perspective. That is one of the things that I have learned about myself. And this is just amazing, kind of like a one setting movie, like a one room movie. That's kind of how this feels. I've seen a lot of criticism about this book trying to do too much, or I think that it's amazing what the author has done in sort of a thought experiment of what would it be like to have only this limited experience. And I obviously am not going to do any spoilers throughout this review, but or not review, but video. This is so good. If you haven't read it, if you haven't seen the movie, I've heard that the movie is amazing. Check it out. Oh my gosh, just try to open your mind to it and see what the author was doing. I highly suggest this. I either gave it 4 or 5 out of 5 stars. As soon as I was done with it, I took it to one of my best friends and I was like, you need to read this and we need to discuss. That's all I'll say about that. The next book that I read roundabout in November was This Savage Song by Victoria Schwab. And I'm not normally a fan of YA or fantasy, but this YA fantasy was amazing. I talked about it a little bit in my 23 video, or which video did I talk? I talk about it in another video because, no, my vlog. I have a reading vlog coming up. I actually have the sequel to This Savage Song, Our Dark Duet, right now. My phone is sitting on top of it. It's one of the mini books that is holding up my phone right now. And I plan on reading it in the next couple of weeks because I have it on loan from the library. So this book is about two halves of a city that are kind of in a battle for control. We've got one that's more militarized, one that is more mob-led, and it's follows two characters. One is the son. Is pretty easy from the beginning why I'm putting that in quotes. The adoptive son of the militaristic leader of the South, and then the actual daughter of the kind of mob boss, totalitarian leader of the North, and how they get together and how they end up having to fight off these monsters that have taken over the world. These monsters are born out of any sort of violence that we as humans have caused. Like basically we, in our hatred and violence towards each other, have created these physical manifestations of that. And it's, it has music in it. It's so good. I got it when it first came out because obviously I've got the hardback version and then it took me forever to read it. But after I got it, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to actually like it. But I went into it and immediately got hooked, and I love this world. So I don't know if it's just a duology or if we'll get more after our Dark Duet, but I'm very excited to read that soon. So the last book that I read that I'll talk about from November is Ellen Foster by Kay Gibbons. And honestly, I can't remember a lot of what this was about. It was a 1 out of 5 stars for me. I read it in one sitting. It's a very short novella. I don't even think it's just over 125 pages. And if you know like movies that are Oscar bait, this just feels like Pulitzer bait. I remember it wanting to have like a bunch of looks into childhood trauma, and like it was supposed to tug at you for that, but honestly it just felt out of touch. The way that some of the characters were written, I honestly thought was racist. It did not hit. It was not good. And what year was this written? It was published in 1987. So I mean, sign of the times, but I hated this book completely. I of course forced myself to finish it because it was so short, but this was not worth it. And I know that a lot of people try to push this on Goodreads as like contemporary classic. Just save yourself the time. It's not memorable. It's not a classic, in my opinion. Another book that I forgot that I read, and this one might be a little bit controversial. I want to give people the right to dislike books that other people have as like their favorites and that are popularly loved. The Silent Patient. I also bought this new when it first came out and just never picked it up, or maybe I picked it up at first, read a few pages and put it back down. I will say that this book was gripping throughout. I was very interested in it, but the twist ending was very so-so for me. I've seen other books do a similar type of twist and they did it way better. This one at the end, I was just like, really? That's what I was waiting for. So I think I gave it a 3 out of 5 because the overall reading experience was good. I enjoyed it most of the way through from what I remember. Yeah, I don't feel like I need to really say what this is about. Okay, I'll say a little bit. Basically, it's just about this woman who is charged with killing her husband, but then she goes mute, and we follow her psychiatrist who is obsessed with her case. Like at the end of the day, once I was done with this, I was unsatisfied. So there you go. I know a lot of people love this, and a lot of people recently have been getting back into reading from this, and that's great for you. It was okay. Like at the end it was just okay. Following on that theme of not terribly liking books that people have as like classics or their favorites, we're gonna move into December. Little Women. So I talk about this on my reading vlog in much depth that will be coming out next week on Monday. So keep an eye out for that if you want to hear like my in-depth opinions on why I didn't super love this. I have conflicting feelings, many conflicting emotions, because there are characters in this book whom I love, and there are characters in this book who can go to hell. Lori, the character is Lori, and then there were other characters who were basically not even people. Like they were just there as a prop. Beth, how dare you treat Beth that way? No, you did her wrong, Louisa. There is very obvious misogyny, patriarchal issues that still exist in this book. And also just kind of like, you know, the Bible beating stuff. That's obvious. I'm not going to talk about that because it could be talked to death. We got to understand when it was written, what it was written for, and then read it from that lens. We can be critical, but just understanding what the book was trying to do. There were many issues within like the actual writing of the book, like the actual text, and the way that it was structured that made it difficult for me to read, that I had a hard time looking past. Also, again, the character development, in the first half, part one, I'm not gonna go into it. I could talk for days about my thoughts on this book. Part one felt like a completely different book from part two. And maybe that is relatable to how life is, your childhood from your adulthood. But anyway, I'm still gonna, okay, so this is one of those copies that has like the 3 books in it, Little Men and Jo's Boys. I'm very interested in Jo's Boys, not so much Little Men. I want to see how Louisa May Alcott does in those. So I'm more so not going to read the rest of this looking for enjoyment, but just to kind of like dissect and see how she takes similar themes, I'm assuming, and morals and applies them to these other 2 stories. I want to see how she did those. But moving on, the last book that I own, but I will be unshelving just because it wasn't bad. I think that I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars, and that is Hester. So this is a historical fiction based on this idea that we could follow the life of possibly, the woman who could have been the inspiration for Nathaniel Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter. So Nathaniel Hawthorne is a character in this book, and we are following the perspective of this woman, Isabel, and she is kind of meant to be, we follow her life, and her life is an imagining of what could inspire the Scarlet Letter. I think I just said the same thing twice, but in 2 different ways. So if one didn't make sense, hopefully the other did. This was a pretty like good book. I did enjoy it. Oh my God. Okay, so I will say, and again, I talk about this in my reading vlog, the first like 100 so pages were so slow. It was a lot of exposition, and a lot of her magic comes through. There's some magical realism through there in her synesthesia. A lot of that comes through in her embroidery mostly. So we get a lot of embroidering scenes, which is beautiful. It's very beautifully written. There's a lot of things about this book that are great, but it can't go unsaid that it was a little boring at times. So I did have to force myself to finish this, unfortunately. But I overall enjoyed it. I thought that the ending was well done. I think that it's very obvious that the author did extensive research. There's some other things that, you know, I had little nits and grits about, but that's in my vlog, so you can watch that if you're interested. And then I have 2 books from the library that I read at the end of December. So the first one is Just Like the Other Girls. Claire. And that is by Claire Douglas. And I actually have a full review on this book coming out in a couple weeks. This was like a fun ride. From what I remember, the ending was so, and there were definitely some issues therein, just with like consistency in the writing, but I think I gave it a 3 out of 5 because it was overall an enjoyable reading experience. We follow a young 20-something who is kind of down on her luck. Her mom just died. She needs a new job. She worked in what is essentially like a nursing home, and she gets a job. She finds a job offer in like the newspaper or whatever one ads to be a caretaker for this affluent older lady. But the older lady is kind of like off a little bit and like may or may not actually need a caretaker and just wants a friend, which is sad. But the other added element is that her grown daughter who is in like her 40s is there and is always just like looming over and being super cruel. But the cool thing about this book, actually I think I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 for the character development. This is one of those books that I absolutely love because of the character development. We get to see so many different sides to so many different women, and the thing that I want to focus on the most about what I loved about this book was motive. So even though we have a lot of unlikable characters, which I talk about this more in the review, we understand why. So we may not necessarily sympathize with them, but we can understand where they're coming from. And I think that this was so artfully done in Claire's writing. So just like the other girls, so good. And it had a really great midway twist that completely caught me, like stopped me in my tracks. I completely stopped and had to go, whoa, okay, we're on to something. All right, so the last book, I don't know if I have enough to say about this to do a review. I might try to record a review for this book and then see if it's long enough, if it's good enough on whether or not I post it. But I think that this book needs to be talked about more. It has only a few hundred reviews on Goodreads, but it has a relatively good rating. This is a debut, almost said debut album. This is a debut novel by Victor Menebo, The Sleepless. Oh my gosh, this is a speculative sci-fi about a pandemic that happens and a quarter of the world's population no longer needs to sleep. Seemingly there is nothing wrong with them, they just don't need to sleep anymore. And we see the kind of unfolding what that does to society, how people break off into these extremist factions. For the most part, most of the world goes on, you know, how it does. The extremists are, you know, that smaller population, but seem to be the loudest. We've seen this. It's so obviously based on recent events. This just came out in 2022. It's actually a NaNoWriMo novel. The original manuscript was written during NaNoWriMo, which I think is so cool. And it's more so about corruption and our reliance on technology, the cloud, and how we're slowly losing our memories to all of the conveniences that technology provides. One thing that I will say why I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 instead of 4 stars is character development is not the best. I still think that the book is amazing. It was surprisingly quick to get through, even though it was it was just shy of 400 pages, and that's kind of a lot for me. But I still moved through this thing. It's very expository, but I enjoyed the exposition. It only got repetitive a few times through, but the repetition is there. But I don't feel like the author is preaching at me, even though it's super obvious what this was inspired by. I don't feel like the author was talking down to me whatsoever. And now that I'm talking through this kind of like in short little snippets, I do feel like I need to do a review on this. If you're interested in a review on this, please let me know in the comments, and that may help sway me to do one. Sorry if the glare is distracting. That is all that I have read in the last couple of months, and I'm very proud of myself. I was not expecting to read this much at all, and yeah, I'm super happy about it. Even though I had a lot of okay reads and a couple not so great reads, I still think that it was a great reading time, and I got a lot of my spark back for reading, hence why I restarted my booktube side of this channel. So if you like this, if this made it was enjoyable for you, don't know how, but you know, maybe like, comment, subscribe, even if you're into inconsistency. So yeah, that's it. Thanks. And I will see you next week, maybe sooner, I don't know, with another video. All right, have a great one.